You got there. Not all the way, maybe, but far enough that the version of you from 10 years ago would look at your life right now and feel something close to envy. The apartment or the house, the job or the career, the relationship or the children, or the freedom from both, whichever you had been working toward. The number in the bank account, or the number of followers, or the number of countries visited, or some other number that had seemed, for a long time, like the one that would finally indicate arrival. You arrived, or close enough, and something happened that the version of you who was working toward all of this did not fully anticipate. The feeling passed. Not the things themselves. The things are still there, most of them. The feeling that was supposed to come with them. The specific quality of finally, the settled sense of having come to rest somewhere worth resting. That feeling arrived for a while, and then did what feelings do, which is change, which is pass, which is leave the same quiet underneath that had been there before the arrival. And now you are here, in this particular dark, having gotten more of what you wanted than most people get. And the quiet underneath is asking a question you are not sure you have an answer to. What exactly were you looking for? Before we begin, leave one word in the comments tonight. One word for what you thought getting there would feel like. Finished, enough, safe, home, free, whatever you had been moving toward. Someone will read it and recognize the same quiet in themselves. If this channel is finding you something worth returning to, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. Now, let your eyes close if they are ready. Tonight we move between two worlds. The first is yours. A woman in Austin who finished her PhD at 34 after 8 years of work and sat in the parking lot after the ceremony and waited for the feeling to arrive, and noticed, after 45 minutes, that something had arrived, but it was not what she had been waiting for. A man in Seattle who sold his company at 41 for more money than he had known how to imagine when he started it, and found himself, 3 months later, waking up at 4 in the morning with nothing to do and no name for the specific quality of that nothingness. A woman in New York who had the relationship she had spent her 30s wanting, the partner, the apartment, the life that looked on the outside exactly like the life she had been describing when people asked her what she wanted, and who lies awake sometimes, wondering why it does not feel the way she thought it would feel. And a man in Denver who retired at 62, healthy and financially secure, who had said for 30 years that all he wanted was to not have to go to work anymore, and who discovered, 6 months into the retirement, that the not going to work was not what he had actually wanted. The second world is older. A merchant of ancient Sri Lanka, who built the largest trading house in his port city, and understood, on the morning it was complete, that he had been building towards something the trading house could not contain. A Japanese abbess of the early Kamakura period, who spent 30 years acquiring wisdom and found, at the end, that wisdom was not the thing she had been acquiring wisdom for. A Tibetan nobleman who gave away every possession he had and discovered that the giving was not what had produced the peace he found. A Korean scholar who achieved every honor his tradition offered and sat alone on the night of the final honor with a question that the honor did not answer. And a very old Vietnamese woman who had lived simply and without achievement by any standard her world offered, and who was, by the testimony of everyone who knew her, the most genuinely at rest person any of them had ever encountered, and who said, when asked her secret, that she had simply stopped running long enough to find out what she had been running from. These stories are contemplative in nature, offered for rest and reflection, not as medical or therapeutic advice. Feel the body right now, not what it has accomplished, not what it is moving toward, just the body, here, breathing, in this specific dark. Whatever you have been looking for, the looking can rest tonight. The stories are waiting. Sarah sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. She was 34 years old, in Austin, and she had just successfully defended her doctoral dissertation after 8 years of work that had reorganized everything. Her 20s, her social life, 3 relationships, the version of herself that existed before she had understood that this was what her life was going to be organized around. The ceremony had been good. Her advisor had said generous things. Her family had been there, and the photographs existed, and the handshake had happened, and the piece of paper existed, and the 8 years of work had produced the thing the 8 years of work were supposed to produce. She sat in the parking lot. She had imagined this moment many times across 8 years, in the specific way that people imagine arrivals they are working toward. The imagining had always included a feeling, a quality of completion, the specific sensation of having come to the end of a long road and finding it was worth the walking. She waited for the sensation. Something arrived. It was real and genuine, and she was grateful for it. It was not the sensation she had been imagining. It was smaller and quieter, and contained within it, almost immediately, the faint outline of the next thing, the postdoctoral application, the job market, the next version of the work that the dissertation had opened rather than closed. She sat with this for 45 minutes. She was not disappointed exactly. She was confused. She had been certain that arriving here would feel different from this. The certainty had been part of what had kept her working through the years when the work was genuinely difficult. And the certainty had been wrong, not completely, but in the specific way that the feeling you imagine before an arrival is always different from the feeling you find when you get there. She drove home. She ate dinner. She called her mother, who was happy, and her best friend, who was happy. She accepted their happiness on her behalf because it was real and it was given with love, and she did not know yet what to do with the specific quiet she had found in the parking lot. She would not understand it fully for several more years, but the understanding, when it came, would not tell her that the 8 years had been wrong. It would tell her something different. In the port city of Gale on the southern coast of Sri Lanka, in the 3rd century of the Common Era, during a period when the spice routes of the Indian Ocean were producing considerable wealth for those who knew how to work them, there was a merchant named Mahinda who had spent 40 years building the largest trading enterprise in his region. He was 62 years old. The enterprise was real and considerable. Ships went out under his authority and returned with cargo that made the calculations work. He had a warehouse complex that extended along the harbor front in a way that was visible from the sea. He had employees who depended on him and relationships with trading partners across the ocean routes, and a reputation for reliability that was, in a business organized around trust, among the most valuable things a person could possess. On the morning that the last building of the warehouse complex was completed, bringing it to the full extent of what he had imagined when he had begun 40 years before, he walked through the empty rooms of the new section before the goods arrived and stood at the window that looked out over the harbor. He had been building toward this for 40 years. The building was finished. He stood at the window for a long time. What he found at the window was not what he had expected to find. Not disappointment. Something harder to name. A specific quality of the question that had been present throughout the 40 years of building, the question that the building had been, he understood now, an attempt to answer. The building had not answered it. Not because the building was wrong. The building was genuinely good, genuinely useful, genuinely the product of 40 years of honest and skilled work. But the question was not one the building could answer, because the question was not about the building. He stood at the window until the workers arrived with the first shipment for the new section, and then he went back to work, because the work was real and the work needed doing. but he carried the window with him after that, the specific quality of what he had found there. The understanding that 40 years of building had shown him that he had been building towards something the building could not contain. He went to a teacher of the Theravada tradition who lived in the hills above the city, a monk of some years, whose name he had known for a long time without previously feeling the need to seek him out. He described the window. The monk listened. Then he asked a single question. He said, "When you imagine the feeling you were building toward, the feeling the completed warehouse was supposed to produce, what does that feeling actually feel like?" Mahinda sat with this. He tried to describe it. "Peace," he said eventually, "a kind of rest, the feeling that something has been resolved." The monk nodded. He said, "And the warehouse, did it produce that?" "No," Mahinda said. The monk said, "Have any of your shipments produced it? Any of your contracts? Any of your expansions across the 40 years?" "No." The monk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What you are describing is not a feeling that is produced by things being completed. It is a feeling that is present when you stop expecting the next thing to produce it. You have been looking for it in the completions. It lives in the space between the looking." Mahinda sat with this for a long time. He did not immediately understand. The understanding came gradually, across the months and years that followed, as he began for the first time in 40 years to occasionally stop building toward something and simply be in the thing he was already in. The warehouse was the same warehouse. The work was the same work, but the quality of his presence in it changed. He was there, actually there, in the harbor city, in the morning light, with the ships and the cargo and the accounts, without always being slightly ahead of it, in the next completion that would finally produce the feeling. The feeling came, not from the completions, from the stopping of the running toward them. He said to his son, near the end of his life, when the son asked what he had learned across a long career, "I learned that the thing I was working toward was not in any of the things I was working toward. I learned this late, but I learned it." Sarah, in her Austin parking lot, was learning it early. She would not have the name for it for several more years, but she had found the window, and the window, once found, changes the direction of the looking. Let the breath be long and slow now. Feel the body settling into whatever is beneath it. You have been working toward things for a long time. Tonight the working can rest. The window is here. And as Mahinda stands at the window of his completed warehouse in the Galé Harbor morning and finds the question that the warehouse could not answer, we travel now to Seattle, where a man sold his company and found himself waking at 4 in the morning with nothing to do. James had sold his company at 41. He was in Seattle, and the company had been his life for 14 years, not in the dramatic way of someone who neglects everything for work, but in the quieter way of something that organizes the rest of your life around itself. The company had been the reason certain decisions were made and others were not. It had been the thing that gave the days their shape. The sale was good. The number was larger than any number he had previously had a personal relationship with. He had taken 3 months to recover from the intensity of the final negotiations and the transition, and then the 3 months had ended and he had woken up one morning at 4 and found that he had nothing to do. Not temporarily, structurally. The thing that had organized the days was gone. The days remained. He was not sad. That was the part that confused him. He was not sad and he was not happy. He was something that did not have a name in the vocabulary he had been using to describe his inner life for 41 years. A quality of absence that was not grief, a spaciousness that was not peace. He tried filling it. He traveled. He invested in other companies, which produced the same shape of days without the same relationship to them. He read. He exercised. He did the things that people in his position were supposed to do, with the freedom they had spent their working lives working toward. The 4 in the morning remained. Not every morning, but often enough that it became something he noticed, a specific quality of wakefulness in the dark that was not anxiety exactly, and was not excitement, and was not looking forward to anything, because there was nothing specific to look forward to. He sat with this for a long time, one particular night, and understood something he had not expected. He had not been working toward freedom. He had been working toward the feeling that he had imagined freedom would produce. And the freedom was here, and the feeling was not what he had imagined, and the question was what he actually wanted, which was a question that 14 years of having the company to organize the days around had allowed him to postpone. The company had not been the answer. It had been a very effective way of not asking the question. In the mountains north of Kamakura in Japan, in the early 13th century, during the period when the new Buddhist schools of the Kamakura era were bringing forms of practice to Japan that had not previously been available, there was a woman named Pema Yangchen, not the Tibetan woman of the passes or the earlier practice story, but a Japanese abbess given a Tibetan name by a teacher who had traveled far, a woman who had spent 30 years acquiring wisdom. She was 61 years old. The wisdom was real. She had studied with teachers of 3 different traditions. She had practiced with the consistency and seriousness that 3 decades of genuine effort produces. She had understood things that most people who practiced did not understand, and her understanding had benefited the students who came to her and the community she led. She was also, in a way she had not told anyone, not at rest, not troubled, not suffering in any obvious way, but not at the rest that she had understood the 30 years of practice to be moving toward. She sat one morning before the other nuns were awake, in the early dark, and asked herself honestly whether the 30 years had produced what she had understood them to be for. The answer was complicated. The understanding was real. The capacity to help others was real. The specific quality of attention that 30 years of practice had developed was real and valuable, and she did not regret a single year of it. But the rest she had been moving toward, the specific quality of having come to ground somewhere stable, somewhere that did not require the continuing effort of maintaining the orientation, that rest had not arrived. She sat with this honestly and without the specific form of self-deception that is available to teachers, which is to describe the rest as present when it is not, because the description is expected. What she found, sitting honestly in the early dark, was that she had been acquiring wisdom in order to arrive at rest, which was a subtle form of the same running she had understood the practice to be addressing. She had been practicing in order to get somewhere. The somewhere was not in the getting. She went to the oldest teacher she knew, a monk of 80 years who had been practicing for 60 of them, and described what she had found in the early dark. He listened. Then he said, "You have been using the practice to chase something. This is very common, and it produces genuine results. But the thing you are chasing is not ahead of you. It is what is present when the chasing stops." He paused. The practice is not a path to the rest. The practice is the rest, if you are in it without trying to get somewhere through it. She sat with this for a long time. She continued to practice. But the quality of the practice changed. She was not acquiring anymore. She was simply in it, the way you are simply in a morning when you are not trying to get through the morning to the next thing. The rest came, not as an arrival, as the recognition that it had been present underneath the running the entire time. James, at 4 in the morning in Seattle, was at the edge of the same understanding. The freedom he had worked toward was here. The feeling he had imagined freedom would produce was different from what was here. And the question was not how to produce that feeling, but what the feeling had been pointing toward, which was not the feeling, but something underneath it. The rest was here, in the 4 in the morning, in the specific quality of the dark, which required nothing of him, and offered everything that the days organized around the company had not had room for. He did not know this yet. But the waking at 4 was the practice, whether he had a name for it or not. The sitting in the unnamed quality of the freedom was the thing the 14 years had been clearing a space for. Let the chest open now, all the way. Let the specific quality of this particular dark, which requires nothing and rushes nowhere, be what it is. And as Pema Yang Chen sits in the early Japanese morning and finds the rest underneath the practice, we come now to the last story, to a Vietnamese woman who had stopped running and found out what she had been running from. Tom had said for 30 years that all he wanted was to retire. He was in Denver, 62 years old, and he had retired 6 months ago from a career in logistics that had been, by his own description across those 30 years, fine. Not bad. Not what he would have chosen if he had been given more choices. Fine in the specific way that most careers are fine, which is to say genuinely useful and not without satisfaction, and also genuinely not what the best version of himself would have spent the best years of his life on. The retirement was everything the not going to work was supposed to be. He slept as long as he wanted. He ate when he was hungry. He watched what he wanted to watch. He visited his grandchildren. He did everything that 30 years of saying, "I just want to retire," had implied he would do when he finally got there. By the 3rd month, he was going to the grocery store every day. Not because he needed groceries every day, because the grocery store provided a reason to leave the house, and leaving the house provided the shape that leaving the house provides. And without that shape, the day had a quality he did not have a word for. By the 4th month, he understood that the 30 years of saying, "I just want to retire," had not been entirely accurate. What he had wanted was relief from the specific things about the work that made the work hard. The early alarm, the commute, the specific people who made certain days more difficult than they needed to be, the feeling of being required to be somewhere he would not have chosen. He had wanted relief from those specific things. He had described the relief as retirement. The retirement had arrived. The relief was real, and underneath the relief was something he had not previously had space to notice, which was the question of what he actually wanted to do with a day that was entirely his. He had not known. The 30 years of work had not required him to know. He sat with this in the grocery store parking lot, which had become a place he thought, on a Thursday afternoon in November, with a small bag of things he did not particularly need. He was not unhappy. He was lost, in a way that did not have the drama of unhappiness, but had its own specific quality. In a village in the Red River Delta of northern Vietnam, in the early years of the 20th century, there was an old woman named Ba Lan. Not the woman who had held the letter, but a different woman of the same kind. A woman of 81 who had lived in the same village her entire life and had never achieved anything that her world would have recognized as achievement. She had raised children. She had worked the land during the seasons when the land required working. She had grown old in the particular way of someone who had not spent her life trying to be somewhere other than where she was. She was known throughout the village for a quality that the people who knew her had trouble describing precisely. The closest they came was something like, at rest. She was genuinely at rest, in a way that most people were not, and the quality of that rest was visible and had a specific effect on people who spent time near her. They became, briefly, more at rest themselves. A younger woman in the village, who was 40, and had spent her adult life working toward a version of her life that was better than the one she had, came to sit with the old woman one afternoon. She asked her, "How do you do it? How are you so at peace?" The old woman thought about this for a while. She was not in the habit of describing herself and was not immediately sure what there was to describe. Finally, she said, "I stopped running." The younger woman asked, "From what?" The old woman said, "I don't know exactly. I ran for a long time without looking back. When I finally stopped and looked, I couldn't see what I had been running from clearly enough to name it, but I could feel the difference between running and not running." She paused. When you are running, there is always something you are running toward. And the running toward it means you are not here. You are slightly ahead of here, in the place where the thing you are running toward will be. And the place where the thing will be is never exactly where you arrive, because by the time you arrive, the thing has moved further ahead. The younger woman asked, "So what do you do instead?" The old woman looked at her for a while. Then she said, "I stay here, not as a decision exactly, more as a noticing. When I notice I have started running again, I stop and look at where I actually am, which is always somewhere specific and real and enough if I am actually in it." The younger woman sat with this. She asked, "What if where you actually are is not where you want to be?" The old woman said, "That is a different question. That question is worth asking. But you cannot ask it honestly while you are running. The running prevents you from seeing clearly enough to know whether where you are is actually not enough, or whether it is enough and you have simply been running too fast to notice." She paused. "Most of the time I have found it is enough. Not always everything I might have wanted, but enough. The problem was not where I was. The problem was that I kept being slightly ahead of where I was." Tom, in his grocery store parking lot in Denver, had found the same question that the old woman had answered. He did not have her answer yet. But he had the question, which was not what he had expected to find in retirement, and which was, he was beginning to understand what the retirement had been clearing space for. The 30 years of work had not been wasted. They had been the running that had eventually, in the parking lot on a Thursday in November, exhausted itself enough to stop. And in the stopping, the actual question, not how to fill the days, what he was actually here for, which was a question worth being lost in, worth sitting with in parking lots, worth taking to the grocery store every day until the answer began to become clear. Let the body be very still now. Not working toward anything, not planning the next thing, just here, in this particular dark, at whatever age you are, with whatever you have accomplished or not accomplished, in the specific body you have. This is where the question lives, in the stillness. We have been in two worlds tonight. The world you know, Sarah in Austin, sitting in a parking lot after 8 years of work, waiting for the feeling that the completion was supposed to produce, and finding something quieter and more honest. James in Seattle, waking at 4 in the morning into the freedom he had worked 14 years toward, and finding in it a question he had not previously had space to ask. And Tom in Denver, going to the grocery store every day, not because he needed groceries, but because he needed a reason to be somewhere, and understanding, finally, that the 30 years of wanting to retire had been about something the retirement could not answer. And the older world, where a Sri Lankan merchant stood at the window of his completed warehouse and found the question that 40 years of building had not answered, where a Japanese abbess sat in the early dark and understood that she had been using the practice to chase something that was present only when the chasing stopped, and where a very old Vietnamese woman told a younger one that the peace she was looking for was not ahead of her, but in the stopping of the running long enough to see where she actually was. Two worlds, the same question. You got something. Maybe everything you thought you wanted. Maybe most of it. Maybe the version of it that arrived was different from the version you had imagined. And underneath the getting, or alongside it, or in the specific hours before dawn, a quiet that the getting did not fill. That quiet is not a problem. That quiet is the actual question. The one that the working toward things had been, in its way, preparing you to ask. The one that cannot be asked honestly while you are in the middle of the running, because the running fills the space where the question lives. The question is not what to get next. The question is what you are actually here for. It is not a comfortable question. It does not produce a simple answer. It requires the specific quality of sitting still long enough that the running settles and what was underneath it becomes visible. Tonight, for the length of this dark, the running can settle. You do not have to answer the question tonight. You only have to let the quiet be what it is, which is not emptiness, which is the space where the answer, when it comes, will have room to arrive. Let the names dissolve. Sarah, James, Tom, Mahinda, Pema Yangchen, Balan. What remains is what was always here. The breath, arriving, the body, held. The specific quality of a night that requires nothing from you, and offers, in that requiring nothing, something that the things you have been working toward could not quite contain. It is enough, right now, exactly as it is. It has always been enough. The merchant's warehouse is complete. The abbess has stopped running toward the practice. The old woman is simply here. And you are here, in this dark, breathing, which is the whole of what is required tonight. Good night. What you were looking for was never ahead of you. Before you go, something small. I made this channel for nights like this one. The nights when you have gotten what you were working toward and found the quiet underneath it, and needed company in that quiet, that was not another instruction to work towards something else. If tonight gave you one moment of simply being where you are, I am genuinely glad. Leave one word in the comments if you feel like it. One word for what you thought getting there would feel like. Someone will read it and recognize the same quiet. And if the quiet Dharma is somewhere you want to return, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. It just means the next time a night like this one comes, this will be waiting. Good night. What you were looking for was never ahead of you.